The man who invented paper money died in exile. He was once the richest and most powerful man in all of France. His bank collapsed and people died fighting for their money. This is how one gambler built and destroyed an entire nation with paper. And it started with a murder in London. The year is 1716. The streets of Paris smell of fresh bread and open sewers. Gold coins clink in every tavern and marketplace, but there is not enough of them to go around. The old king is dead. The country is broke after decades of war. Shopkeepers lock their doors at dusk. Nobody trusts anyone else with their money. 22 years earlier, a tall young Scotsman walked into a London alley behind Bloomsbury Square and ran his sword through a man named Beau Wilson. It was a duel over a woman. John Law was arrested, tried for murder, and sentenced to hang. He escaped from prison and fled to the continent, where he spent years studying banks and gambling systems across Europe. Now he was in Paris with an idea no one had ever tried at this scale. He believed a country did not need gold. It needed only paper, and the belief that the paper was worth something. And he was about to convince the most powerful man in France to let him try. The regent of France, the Duke of Orleans, was desperate for a solution to the country's empty treasury. John Law walked into his court with a proposal. He would open a bank that issued paper notes instead of gold coins. Paper money is a printed piece of paper that stands in for gold or silver, so people can trade without carrying heavy coins. The regent agreed. In 1716 the Banque Générale opened its doors. At first people were suspicious. But the notes worked. Trade picked up. Shopkeepers accepted them. The French economy woke up after years of sleep. Law followed with something even bigger. He launched the Mississippi Company, a business granted total control over all trade with the French colony of Louisiana in America. People were told the land was full of gold and silver. The shares took off. A narrow street called Rue Quincampoix became the trading center of Paris. Crowds packed the alley from dawn until dark. Nobles stood in line for 6 hours just for a word with Law. Hunchbacks rented out their curved backs as portable writing desks for filling out share applications. Rent on the street increased more than 10 times. The share price climbed from 500 livres to more than 10,000. The word millionaire was used for the first time. But no one knew how fast it would all fall apart. The first crack came in the spring of 1720. Law realized the share price had climbed too far from any real value. He tried to slowly bring it down with a controlled devaluation. He announced the shares would drop in stages, and the paper banknotes would lose half their face value by the end of the year. The public did not take it calmly. People rushed to the bank to trade their paper notes for real gold. The narrow Rue Quincampoix turned from a buying frenzy into a selling panic. Crowds pressed against the bank doors so hard that people in the front were crushed. 15 people were trampled to death in a single day in July. Armed guards hired by the bank fired on the crowd. The bodies were carried through the streets on carts. The fates were different for everyone. A servant who had invested his life savings early and sold at the peak walked away rich. A nobleman who sold his country estate to buy more shares lost everything. A baker who accepted paper notes for bread found his savings worthless within months. Across France, the paper money that had saved the economy now destroyed it. But the strangest part was not the crash itself. The strangest part was that none of this was new. The same pattern had played out before and would play out again. Every time a new kind of wealth appears, a bubble follows. Tulip bulbs in Amsterdam. South Sea shares in London. Internet stocks in the year 2000. Digital coins in our own time. The names change. The technology changes. The countries change. But the people inside the story never change. Paper money was not evil. It was just a tool. The problem was not the paper. The problem was the belief that you could get rich without working, that someone had found a shortcut to wealth that no one had discovered before. Every bubble promises the same thing. This time it is different. This time we have a new system, a new technology, a new reason the old rules no longer apply. Short sellers and skeptics are always shouted down on the way up. True believers always outnumber the cautious. And the crash always arrives faster than anyone thinks possible. Human beings have been running the same cycle for at least 400 years. There is no reason to believe we have stopped now. And that is not even the most ironic part. The most ironic part is that John Law did not even keep the money. He fled France in December of 1720 with barely £800 to his name. The regent let him leave the country. He wandered Europe for 9 years, gambling in various cities, never returning to the power he had once held. He died in Venice in 1729, poor and largely forgotten. The man who convinced an entire kingdom that paper was wealth died with almost nothing of his own. 30 years after his death, a Scottish journalist would sit down to write the most famous book ever written about financial madness, and he would get half the stories wrong. That story is next.